Welcome back. In a moment, we'll examine the legacy of France's colonial rule in Algeria. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. We start with France, where far-right presidential candidate Marine Le Pen has been accused of plagiarising a speech by her former rival, François Fillon. The speech was made in the town of Villepinte, north of Paris, and it contained comments nearly identical to those that Fillon made weeks earlier. The US military's controversial missile defense system, THAAD, is now operational in South Korea. The defense installation has sparked protests in the country as local people believe it may provoke an attack and risks the lives of those living nearby. And the social media giant Facebook has denied allegations that it deliberately targeted vulnerable and insecure young people in order to push advertising. The accusations were made in an as-yet unpublished research paper that covered Australia and New Zealand. Well, back now to our discussion of Algeria as the country prepares for parliamentary elections. While there's apparent apathy from voters about that ballot, people are taking notice of the presidential elections in France, where the colonial relationship between the two countries is still a current political issue.
The French occupation of Algeria began in 1830, with the movement for independence gaining momentum after World War II, more than a century later. Under colonial rule, traditional and religious culture was suppressed, with Islamic education replaced by French teachings. Muslim Algerians were declared French subjects, receiving none of the benefits of citizenship. After 130 years of colonial French rule and 7 years of war, Algeria won its independence.
Let's talk about that now with my guest who's joining us on a Skype call. Yasser Louati is a French human rights and civil liberties activist. His work focuses on national security policies and social justice for minorities. We'll also hear from Tamsanka Zhu in a moment. Yasser, who do you think, if we can take an average Algerian, who of the two French presidential candidates would be a better outcome for them?
Actually, none of them. Right now, the whole French population, and especially minorities in France, are actually caught between two disastrous choices, fascism and neoliberalism. And, you know, the minorities in France are beyond fed up with the masquerade we call elections. For once, the Socialist Party that was supposed to actually cater or to take care of minorities, or to actually go along the needs of the dominated, for once in the past 40 years had a candidate who actually upheld a program in favor of the working class, of the banlieue, the working class ethnic neighborhoods, that stood openly against racism and Islamophobia, for the rights of the Palestinians, etc. That even took heat by all other candidates for his defense of Muslim women to wear the headscarf, should they decide to. What happened in return is that the Socialist Party boycotted him and the whole leadership fled to Emmanuel Macron. So today the choice is between Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron, and where people are being coerced into choosing one of them. And that's why the first political party nationally and even among minorities is actually abstention.
The connection is clear from an old colonial power to Algeria of today, but is the influence of France and its government still powerful in Algeria?
I think it's the other way around. The French election, by and large, are affected, especially these ones, by Algeria and the Algerian question and the colonial legacy. Because remember, Marine Le Pen is leading a party that is, according to the people who have made all these analyses, has its roots in what happened in Algeria. Because in Algeria, there were two schools. There were people who were fighting for France to remain a colony, who saw themselves as more superior to people in Algeria and wanted to hold on to it. And that's the ideology that was then taken by Marine Le Pen's father, and then became the party that she is leading or representing today. But you also have other people, especially in Algeria, who say it just doesn't matter what happens. We know Bouteflika's government have always maintained some links, and Macron went to Algeria. And of course, he was criticized for that because he is seeing that link and that importance is trying to bridge that gap.
But do Algerians in France feel welcome or unwelcome, whether they are labourers with seeking manual work, or as we heard earlier in the programme about the brain drain, you know, somebody in more white-collar work.
It's not that easy. You've got so many people who are of Algerian origin who are now as French as anybody else, and they are trying to fight for their own space, and we'll see Marine Le Pen as somebody who is undermining their Frenchness and the importance of their religion, who they are, their identity. And also you have all generations. I think Francois Hollande stretched to them, those that have fought for France in the past. And he was stretching over to them and said they must be given their citizenship and their rights. But now the biggest problem that you have is for them, they feel they're outside the entire thing. Because what Francois Hollande has done, what Yas has just been saying is most of them say one thing, but when it comes to events in France, they then see themselves, all these Algerians see themselves as a community that is being targeted, that is being blamed for events, be they social, be they crime, be they terrorism. They don't see themselves as being accommodated in the state. So that's why they say it doesn't really matter who then becomes president. They can't trust that they will be considered as an equal.
And Yasser, do you think all Algerians feel that way, that France is no longer either a controlling power, if you feel negatively about France, or a help, you know, a country that actually looked after Algeria in the past?
Well, actually, first we have to go back a bit and do some history. The French Republic, as it was understood in the 19th century, stood as a colonial republic. For example, in 1848, when it was reinstated, it did not put an end to the colonial enterprise that was launched in North Africa. As a matter of fact, you know, Algeria became part of France, but the Algerians, the indigenous people, were not considered as fully fledged citizens. And that treatment goes on today, even if you are holding a French citizenship after 2 and 3 generations, you are not perceived as a French citizen. Of course, politicians say the French Constitution does not recognize any ethnicity or community or race. Nevertheless, people are treated according to their skin color, their religion, or their ethnic background. And that's a deep problem, because even Emmanuel Macron, when he first spoke about colonization, he first said that it brought positive outcomes. Then he backtracked when he went to Algeria and said, no, actually it was a good thing, it was a bad thing, etc. Then when he came back to France, he changed his mind again because of the pressure upon him was that, no, we cannot accept the idea that colonization was bad. As a matter, for example, I went to Nice to shoot a documentary in the aftermath of the Bastille Day attack, and you have a monument celebrating the colonial enterprise. France's problem, and that's why I'm calling openly for a new republic and a new constitution, is that it entered a state of voluntary amnesia over colonization, even if the colonial heritage or the colonial legacy is expressed daily with openly racist remarks from politicians. Don't forget, for example, Laurence Rossignol, the so-called Minister of Women's Rights, who compared, quote, Muslim women wearing a headscarf to American Negroes who were in favor of slavery. When you have people identifying France not as a country as it is today, multicultural, as a matter, I even met so many British journalists, they were like, the France we meet in the subway is so different from the France we meet in offices and in the French media. And
but yes, if it is to be President Macron, what are they to make? What are Algerians looking northwards to make of a President Macron in France, in the sense of which version of what he says do they think will stick around when he's in power?
Well, our history is too politicized, sir. In 2005 alone, for example, they tried to pass a bill to praise the colonial legacy, and every single time you relate to the colonial legacy, people tell you you are whining over the past. Well, I'm sorry, when France is still treating people according to their skin color as it was done back in the colonies, and if people who have my skin color, my religion or not, but who are perceived as foreigner, and when the nation is identified and defined in complete opposition to whatever is not white and Christian, then these problems will go on, Emmanuel Macron does not have the political spine to stand against the pressure. And as long as France and its elites do not want to face the colonial heritage, the so-called Algerian minority here in France will have to battle just for their basic rights to be perceived as, equally fledged citizens.
Yes, Luati and Tamsin Kaju, thank you both very much indeed. Let's end our programme with the Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. Today, a daring helicopter rescue has been undertaken between the coasts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. A surfer was picked out of the sea more than 20 kilometres offshore after going missing some 32 hours earlier. Matthew Bryce had not been seen since late Sunday morning, until the Belfast Coast Guard spotted him early Monday evening. He's been described as extremely lucky and in a stable condition, despite having suffered from hypothermia. And that's all from me for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.